Well, it's nice to see everyone today. I am David Rowan. I am a psychologist by training and a consultant at Psychological Associates. As I mentioned, I'm coming to you from St. Louis, Missouri. And of course, I have my colleague with me, Marianne.
Yes. Hey, David, and hello to all of our guests. Again, so glad that you took time away from your schedule to join us today. I'm Marianne Whelchel. I am a human resources consultant located in the greater Indianapolis area. Have worked with Psychological Associates for a long time, probably longer than I care to admit, doing facilitation and consulting and so forth. My previous role, I was the Director of Leadership Development for Cummins Incorporated, which is based in Columbus, Indiana, just down the road a little bit from where I sit.
Fantastic. Well, I did see someone give a shout out to Memphis Barbecue in the chat.
I
So
know, I
that's
saw that
fair.
Memphis barbecue.
That's fair.
Yeah, Cummins has
Yeah.
some facilities in Memphis, and I've had that barbecue. It's pretty good.
Absolutely. Well, as we're starting, we just want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, AccuMaxim. AccuMaxim is a strategy company that helps business owners scale their business by improving cash flow and profits. They help business owners implement plans to reach their 3 to 5 year business goals. So thank you, AccuMaxim, for your sponsorship. We appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you, AccuMath. I really do appreciate that. So as you've discovered, we're big friends of the chat feature in Zoom. So we really encourage you to send your comments and questions along to us as we progress throughout the session. David and I will make every effort to try to respond to each of the comments that we see and answer questions as our time allows. If we should run out of time, please be assured that we will communicate with you directly by email. I know sometimes people have a specific situation, David, in mind, and they'd like a little guidance on that, and we're happy to do that via email. So we've already had, I think, a great technology check. Again, if you happen to have any problems along the way, please don't hesitate to contact our host, and we'll try to help you get those sorted out. I also wanted to just remind everyone that this session is being recorded, and the recording will be available next Monday, June 28th. So just a couple of comments there.
Fantastic. Well, we've got a lot of ground to cover today, Marianne, and we're looking forward to sharing both some helpful concepts and some practical tips. We're going to define a few terms for you, including we're going to talk about compassionate leadership. Oh, whoops, I went too fast. Sorry. Including compassionate leadership. And we're going to differentiate between empathy, sympathy, and compassion. We'll give you some specific skills to better understand performance issues. Now, for those familiar with our model, the Psychological Associates model, Q4 model, we'll talk you through how you can stay what we call above the line and Q4 with your behaviors. For those who are unfamiliar with the model, don't worry, we'll briefly review it for you as we go through. We're going to discuss how leaders can balance getting things done while treating people with respect and regard, because you really can do both at the same time. And finally, we'll tackle how you as a leader can work through the challenges of the external demands you know your direct reports are facing, how you can help them overcome those barriers while you simultaneously hold them accountable.
David, we've had a quick question about access to the recording after the webinar. Absolutely. You will have access to the recording, and we do encourage you, maybe perhaps you'd like to share some thoughts with a colleague who isn't able to attend. You're welcome to do that. So it again will be available on Monday, June 28th. All right, so in today's session, we thought it would be interesting to follow two individuals, an employee and his manager, as they navigate this very delicate balance of compassion and accountability. So I'd like to introduce you to, first of all, each character. Please note that these are completely fictitious individuals. They're not modeled after any real people or scenarios. The characters, though, and the storyline, we think are pretty typical and designed to reflect the challenges that many employers and leaders, as well as organizations, are facing today. So first, let's talk about Jared, as we see here on the slide. Currently a senior financial analyst reporting to Annalise, who is obviously his manager. Jared is part of a group of 7 people supporting the financial reporting for a business sector in their organization. Jared himself has been with the organization about 5 years and has been rated a good performer. He has ambitions to move into a supervisory role, hopefully within the next 2 to 3 years or so. Now, as you see pictured on the right, we have Annalise, who has about 15 plus years of leadership experience with her organization, all of it in the finance sector. Regarding Jared, she's noted that he has had an occasional problem with a project, but tends not to discuss big issues with her. Rather, instead, he turns to a more senior analyst within this group of 7 for help. So, David, let's maybe see if anybody has some thoughts or opinions at this very initial moment about Jared and Annalise. So, what I'd like you to do is just think about your own team, your organization. Maybe you've experienced a situation similar, either from the perspective of Annalise or as Jared, the employee. If you have, what we'd like you to do is use that chat feature to share that word or short phrase that kind of describes your situation or just your view about either character. And again, if you haven't had any particular experiences that sound familiar, go ahead and just give us that preliminary view. What will happen is that this information really will help David and me kind of gain a deeper insight into the real world problems you can be facing in demonstrating this compassionate leadership while holding employees accountable. We'll also be able to tailor our comments a little bit more specifically to the situation you might be facing. So, David, we've already got several great comments. I've noticed one is there a trust issue here? And again, here's another one coming through on trust. Another question about why is Jared bypassing Annalise? I think those are all really great questions. I love this one too from Ethan. Annalise can't solve it if she's not communicating. And Les says this is very familiar, similar. How to challenge Jared constructively so he doesn't get defensive. So I think those are all great comments and really resonate with me as I think about my own HR experience. What about you, David?
You're absolutely right. People have honed in on the trust issue and the breakdown in communication. And so there are lots of questions at this point. Now, we may not have had, like you said, Marianne, exactly this situation happen, but everyone can think of a time when maybe you hesitated before you went to speak with someone, whether it was your boss or a colleague. You kind of knew it was the right thing to do to go talk to them, but there was something holding you back. And it does kind of raise that issue of, well, gosh, what was holding you back? And was there anything that leader might have done to create a more open environment where the person would say, yes, I can share whatever's going on with my boss.
Yeah, without repercussion.
without repercussions. That's exactly right. Yeah,
absolutely. So, I think we can probably all agree that this past year has really thrust all of us into some really new and, quite frankly, very difficult circumstances that have tried us to the very core of our abilities to demonstrate an understanding of another's frustrations, while at the same time respond with what we call energetic caring. And all the while, all of that's going on, we've also been asked to keep our eyes on the bottom line with the results expected of each and every single one of us. From a big picture perspective, never before, I think, have our businesses been so challenged to stay afloat. David, what are your thoughts on kind of these two skill sets that we're talking about that have been demanded of leaders?
Yeah, Marianne, you've really touched on a tension I think that all leaders feel. On the one hand, we're pulled to get results, which means holding people accountable to standards of quality, consistency, timeliness, all those performance metrics that we're accustomed to using. And on the other hand, we see the struggles people face and the difficulties of juggling caring for family, caring for relatives, especially this last year, caring for communities outside of work as we're all coming out of COVID, right? Where there's a lot to do to get our communities back together and back in shape, let alone finding time to care about yourself. Right. Of course, it's what is the old adage? Sharpen the saw, right? You got to take care of your own body, mind, and spirit so you can show up as your best self for others. Well, in an article published by HBR, Hogarth, Carter, and Hobson note that the most effective leaders display an approach they call wise compassion. And I really love that terminology. Simply put, wise compassion means getting tough things done in a human way. They offer a number of useful suggestions for how we can all cultivate wise compassion, because as leaders we all want to do that. It starts with having self-compassion. Interestingly enough, it's that sharpen the saw. Make sure you're seeking, finding, and maintaining balance in your own life so you can be a model of what that looks like. The next is ask yourself, how can I be of benefit to my direct reports? How can I help them maximize their full potential as employees? So in terms of your communication style, they suggest things like, and this is not unusual, we've heard this before, candor and transparency. Be a bit open, be willing to be a bit vulnerable. Now, interestingly enough, Alan said, gosh, sometimes you don't go to your boss because you're unclear about expectations. Well, Alan, that's exactly right. Your boss does need to be able to be clear about expectations, standards, how is your performance being measured? What kinds of things can you bring to the boss? What is the boss open to discussing? And so absolutely, you want to have that open two-way dialogue, and you want to let them know if they do have any shortcomings, how can they close the gap? So great suggestions from this article. The last one I'll mention here is, when possible, if you have an employee who's struggling, and this may seem simple, but just have little touch points every day. Whether it's you see them at a meeting, you have a one-on-one, maybe it's a phone call, maybe it's an IM, maybe it's an email back and forth. It's just an acknowledgement of, hey, I'm here, I can support you. If there's something you need, just reach out. So those are some great practical tips, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, in another study conducted by McKinsey in 2001, so just this year, they learned that leaders could create a culture and a climate that supports optimal performance. They found that a combination of what they call supportive leadership behaviors and consultative leadership behaviors result in a positive team climate. So what's a positive team climate? Well, it's a well-named concept. It means that everyone on the team believes that they are valued, right? People believe that their contributions make a difference. And additionally, people believe that their ideas and suggestions are heard. So it's valued, contributions make a difference, and their ideas and suggestions are heard. Also, that it's okay to say, I don't know if I don't know, right? We want that from our employees. If they're struggling or having a hard time or they don't know something, we want them to say, it's safe, it's okay. You can trust that you can say, I don't know. And that's all right. I'll help you close the gap in your knowledge or your skill set. That it's okay to say, I'm not sure if I can do that. I don't have the bandwidth. I don't have the time, the resources. So the study also found that a positive team climate, which is created through those things we just discussed, improves engagement and improves performance. So we know through studies and through our own experience that compassionate accountability is ultimately helpful for everyone on your team, for you and for your employees.
Yeah, David, I was, in rereading that quote that you pulled, I was pleasantly surprised that the word authoritative behaviors was not included.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Because sometimes that's the tendency when someone's not pulling their weight, we just like, okay, we just gotta get authoritative. So,
Yeah.
so as we journey through this scenario with Jared and Annalise, let's see what are the options to being authoritative. So that's what we'll explore a little bit. I'd like to just talk a little bit more about the situation. Let's move a little bit deeper into understanding the challenges that Annalise faces while she's searching for that, what we call equilibrium point between compassion and accountability. As we dig deeper, we'll find, first of all, let's talk a little bit about Jared and what's going on with him. There's probably a good reason that we selected this photo with him rubbing his temples here. He's having some personal issues that are spilling over into his performance at work. Jared's spouse is expecting twins, and she's having some significant problems with her pregnancy, especially in the morning. That has put some responsibility on Jared then to take charge of getting their preschool child ready and off for school and daycare. As a result, unfortunately, Jared has missed several key meetings, and he failed to deliver a presentation for a senior leader on time. He did deliver, but he was in fact one day late. He's missed a couple of other deadlines on some other minor projects. Now, what about Annalise? What's her side of the story? Well, regarding the senior leader presentation that Jared delivered one day late, unfortunately, Annalise found out about that in a bit of an uncomfortable way. The senior leader contacted Annalise, mentioned that she did not have sufficient time to review the presentation and prepare, and this was for a key stakeholder, and all of it, of course, was due to the late delivery from Jared. So now, given a little bit more of that backdrop on this particular situation, let's start thinking about, okay, Annalise has to begin to, take some action and think about, okay, what is the right balance? So I'd like you to just reflect on what we have shared so far with Jared and Annalise. And of course, this is fictitious, so you can wait, or you can, just imagine whatever you want about it. Maybe, you'd like to read a little bit more into this or that. Go ahead. It's fictitious. That's fine. But what I would like you to do is to put yourself into the role of Annalise, and I want you to answer the poll question that you now see on your slide. So consider the options that we presented there, marked A through E. Select the one that you think is closest to the way that you, in fact, might handle this. And I'd like to point out that David and I were quite careful in constructing this. We didn't come up with the perfect option. There never is one perfect option. So there may be, some of you are like, oh, maybe, but just go for the closest one. And if in fact you are familiar with the dimensional model that David mentioned, I'd like you to also think about, well, this behavior sounds a little Q2, or this behavior sounds Q1 or Q4, or whatever it happens to be. So we're going to ask you about that in just a minute. I think you've got about 30 seconds to answer the poll. So we'll let Jessica do her magic and get this launched, and we'll see how it comes out.
And how many of us can empathize with, how about none of the above?
Yeah. Sorry, Les. No, you got to choose one.
I love that. We wanted to put you in a little bit of a pickle with this. We did, because sometimes you feel like there's no good options. I mean, that's how life is. You think, oh, geez.
That's it, Ellen. Absolutely.
Yeah, I feel like I kind of can't win if I do this. I can't win if I do that. This one's only partially right. So often we do find ourselves in complex situations where there are competing demands, competing priorities. And I think for a fair number of leaders, certainly earlier in your career, maybe even as you move along and learn a few things, you just feel like, oh, this is one of those no wins. I've got this employee who's struggling, and I want to help them, but I don't really even know what's going on. And I'm a little mad. They put me in a really
Yeah,
bad situation. My boss.
especially with the senior
Yeah,
leader breathing down your neck
yeah,
saying,
yeah. I got a little guff
you
from
goofed up.
somebody. Yeah. I mean, it was a little tense there for a minute. So
Yeah.
yeah, so we do understand that sometimes, when you're not maybe feeling great, you might have a little edge to your voice when you go and talk to Jared, whoever Jared may be in your life, and pass along some of that stress and tension you felt when the senior leader confronted you. Uh, you know, so uh, so please, if you could, I know we don't love any of the choices, and you think, oh, that one doesn't make any sense, and I wouldn't do that. Just go ahead and put one down, and
Yeah,
then
select the one
we
that's
can keep
best.
moving.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, got best.
So
And we just got to know, we probably got now about between 10 and 15 seconds. So
yeah, yeah.
um, go ahead.
All right, we've got a nice comment in the chat, so everybody can go ahead and take a look at that.
Thank you, Les. Just least offensive option.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Love it.
Yeah.
Okay. So David, it looks like our most accountable, or I'm sorry, our most popular option is B, which is, okay, I'm going to hold Jared accountable, but I'm going to back him up. I'm going to pick up the pieces if in fact that should happen. That's followed by option D, which is avoid worrying about the projects and try to maybe negotiate, navigate the politics with senior leaders by checking in with them, smoothing over any issues, bringing coffee, that kind of stuff. So
go.
those seem to be the two most popular. David, any thoughts?
We asked folks who are familiar with the model to say, is there anything that's a non-Q4 behavior in any of these answers? And I think we can all agree that in answer B, there's a little bit of Q3 behavior there, right? It's don't really confront them, don't really hold them, accountable directly. Just do it yourself and talk to them maybe after the fact. So not that it's a complete Q3 answer, because you are going to hold them accountable, but maybe a little flavor of that. And then interestingly enough, in answer D, you're going to meet for coffee to smooth things over. That might have a little Q3 in it as well, depending on what you say and how you do it. If you use a lot of flowery language and you just, try to butter them up rather than really talking through your responsibilities and owning what happened on your team.
Absolutely. I think, David, too, I think there's maybe a little bit of Q1 in B as well.
Yeah.
I'm the technical guru. I can do it. I can do it better than he can anyway, so I'll just do it myself. So there's a little bit of, hey, it's really about me anyway there.
Yeah.
So
that's fair. That's fair. Well, Marianne, as we're talking about this concept of accountability and compassion, we might want to just spend a little bit of time talking about and defining some of our terms.
Yeah,
So
let's do it.
Yeah, when I talk with leaders about compassion, empathy, and sympathy, it's also often helpful to just sort of reflect on that. So, as you know, I mentioned at the beginning, I'm a psychologist by training, and psychologists have some specific definitions of these terms. First, sympathy, and that means to feel for someone. It means being able to understand what they're feeling, but not necessarily joining with them in the feeling. When I say we, I mean psychologists often think of this as keeping a little bit of distance between yourself and the other person. Now, if you can, I want to invite you. You see there's a question there. I want to invite you to add your comments and thoughts into the chat. So how do you express sympathy to others? Feel free to share that with us. Next, let's talk about empathy. Empathy is feeling with someone. So it goes a little farther than sympathy. It means feeling a bit sad when they feel sad, or maybe feeling a bit anxious when they feel anxious. It's like sitting down. Imagine someone, you come along someone in the park and they're sitting there looking maybe a bit dejected. And rather than just walking by, you sit down next to them, elbow to elbow, and you see things from their point of view. From a psychologist's perspective, empathy is getting a bit closer to connecting with the other person. Now let's talk about compassion. Compassion can be thought of as empathy plus the desire to relieve the person from their suffering or distress. That's hey, can I help you feel a little bit better by engaging with you and doing some problem solving. So great. Thanks for people for jumping right in. And you all may remember that Brene Brown actually did a kind of what's become a famous YouTube video and TED Talk on this with some associated drawings and cartoon characters, and noted that the the sympathetic reaction is to kind of keep some distance and say, oh, sorry you feel that way. And the empathetic reaction is kind of to go right next to the person and say, yeah, this really does stink. This is hard for you. So kind of an interesting topic.
Yeah, David, we also got a couple of great comments in the chat about not just the words and how you might express sympathy or empathy or compassion, but also the tone of your voice and the body language and eye contact. So I think that's important to remember as well.
Yeah, that is so true. When we talk about, emotional intelligence and all of the skills that Goleman and so many others have written eloquently on over the years, we know that the nonverbals are a huge part of expressing concern and connection and showing people you're there for them and with them. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Susan's
offered, this will be our last one. Susan's offered a very succinct, I think, summary of sympathy. It's via words, it's very passive. Empathy, it's via actions and putting self in other shoes. Compassion is active in the offer of something. So I liked that summary. It was nice. Thank you, Susan.
Yeah, that's great. That is nice. Now I imagine that many of you, as we've already acknowledged, are familiar with our model of leadership, the dimensional model of leadership behavior. The model really is at the heart of everything we do at PA. But for those who are new, let's just do a quick review, or those who maybe don't work with it every day, let's do a quick review. So as you know, the model is based on two axes or continuum. The vertical line represents the task continuum. The higher you go on the task continuum, the more your behaviors are proactive and oriented towards making things happen. And it's interesting, that kind of connects with the idea of compassion as being active. So I like to see those dots connecting there. Now, the lower you go, the more your behaviors are reactive and letting things happen. Now, the next axis is the horizontal axis, is the people continuum. The farther to the left you go, the more your behaviors show a lack of regard for others. So not sympathy or empathy, really. The farther to the right you go, the more your behaviors show high regard for others. So it's that attempt to feel with and feel for. Now, this creates four quadrants. In the upper right, or pardon me, I've got a little frog in my throat. In the upper left-hand quadrant, you see Q1 behaviors, which is a tell and do style of leadership. I tell, you do. In the lower left-hand corner, you see Q2 behaviors, which tend to be passive behaviors from a leader. Now, in the lower right-hand quadrant, you see Q3 behaviors, which favor socializing and also avoiding conflict. Finally, in the upper right-hand corner, you see Q4 behaviors. That's a leader who balances proactively making things happen while treating others with a high level of regard and respect. They involve and challenge people, and they gain true commitment to the mission and purpose of the organization. Now, I want to emphasize that this is a behavioral model. Sometimes people look at this and they start to think maybe it's a personality model. It really isn't. All of us have used each of the four types of leadership behaviors at different times. Now, motivation plays a big role in driving the behaviors that we exhibit. And so just also know, excuse me, I still have that frog, Marianne. Just also know that, think about yourself and what motivates you. There may be times when you react with a Q1 behavior. Maybe you're not at your best self, but there's some underlying tension or frustration or something that's kind of driving that behavior. Well, let's talk a little bit more in detail about the Q4 and Q3 leadership behaviors. So when people first encounter the model, they sometimes think that Q3 behaviors include a high level of empathy and compassion. They think, oh, Q3, that's the really people-focused quadrant. Now that's partially correct. While Q3 behaviors are motivated by a desire for harmony in relationships and a high level of interest or motivation in social bonding and social belonging, there is something critical that's missing. When someone is using Q3 behaviors, they're not being completely candid, open, and clear with their communication. In other words, a leader who's using Q3 behaviors would not take the time to sit down with their direct report and have an honest dialogue about, hey, you kind of left me hanging when you turned that in one day late, Jared. I got this email from the senior leader and they were pretty disappointed. A Q3 leader wouldn't do that. The Q3 leader would just say, oh gosh, looks like you had a tough day, take care of the work and keep moving. So when you think about it, that's actually not as compassionate as it could be. It may seem compassionate to brush it under the rug and not mention it, but you're glossing over something that actually is important to that direct report. They're struggling. They probably know they're not living up to those standards and goals and metrics that they're trying to live up to in terms of their performance. And so actually what's more compassionate is doing what we call moving from below the line to move above the line. So above the line behavior, Q4 behaviors, take some courage from leaders. And I know everybody here who's a leader has felt that, right? You felt that moment where your heart maybe skips a beat when you have to have a tough conversation with someone. You're like, oh, this is going to take a little fortitude on my part. You must be ready as a Q4 leader to sit with your direct report as they face into their challenges and struggles. You got to be ready to face, I may not have all the answers, but boy, we got to tackle this thing together. Also, you have to do a little bit of feeling with to really get their perspective, to understand where they're coming from. You're going to have to do some active listening. You're going to have to pause and reflect and ask questions and probe deeper. And that means you're going to start to really get into some of their struggles at a deeper level. Now, you may feel a little discomfort then, but to be Q4, you're going to balance the empathy you're feeling and the compassion you have to help them solve the problem, to be active, to do something. You're going to balance all that with your need to meet business responsibilities. And that actually helping them live up to and live into their role to meet business responsibilities is long-term the most compassionate thing you can do. So let's just take an example here and reflect on the word forceful, which is in the Q4 zone. Yeah, this is an
David,
interesting one, Marianne.
It is. That's always the pushback when we talk about the model. People say, "Up, forceful." No, that's Q1. But I thought you had a really interesting analogy around force that I think people can relate to.
Yeah. So, in business, we build, we create, we impact the world around us. We move things. And think about that for a minute. We move things. Just like in physics, where movement requires concentrated effort and force, right? In business, we need concentrated effort and force. When we say Q4 is forceful, though, we don't mean that you as a leader are forcing people to do something that's bad for them or against their self-interest. We mean that, or coercive, we mean instead that you as a leader are saying to them, hey, team, person, we need to build and create. Let's all put our shoulders down. Let's all push together, right? Like physics, and move something. And together we can get it done. For this to happen, you need to have a little bit of courage as a leader. You need to have the strength of the team. You need to have the concentrated force and effort of everyone in the team. So with this in mind, you think, oh, forceful actually makes a lot of sense. We are impacting, making things happen. Now, let's talk again about Annalise and Jared and reflect on how she can move above the line to engage Jared and get his full effort.
Yeah, absolutely. Annalise, she knows she's got to have a conversation with Jared to share the feedback from the senior leader that she got, a little bit of disappointment, as well as address some of those other smaller performance issues that we alluded to early on. So prior to this meeting, she scheduled some time on her calendar to prepare for this important discussion. And boy, I want to emphasize that if there's one piece of feedback that I've received probably over and over again from really working with a dimensional model and something called the 5-step format that we'll reference in just a minute, it's the need for preparation. Sometimes leaders go into these meetings without really thinking about it, without putting, pen to paper and sketching out a few ideas. And that preparation time will become your best friend if in fact you do take the time to really think about how you're going to work through that. Annalise also needs to think about, and people pointed it out at the very beginning, about this trust issue. Is there something about the way that she communicates, something about her body language or her verbal communication that does in fact communicate a lack of trust? I don't know. It's a good time to reflect on her own leadership behaviors and to really think about what tools she can use to really have a very constructive meeting with Jared and, kind of work through his situation and see if they can come up with a satisfactory solution. So let's take a look next at what might work to achieve that particular balance. I mentioned, another tool that Psychological Associates has, which is called the 5-step format. If you're familiar with that, you know that Annalise should, in fact, begin a conversation by really greeting Jared, kind of sharing the purpose of the meeting and inviting him to really fully participate through a benefit statement, and then finally kind of checking his receptivity. And then she should use a series of tools that really help to engage Jared and demonstrate what David referred to, that active listening. So what David and I are going to do, because I know as leaders, sometimes we just don't get a chance to hear those. So David and I are going to demonstrate a couple of the tools that if we were coaching Annalise, we'd recommend her to use. While we're doing that, I invite you to share a word or phrase as you listen to the tool and you say, yep, that's going to work for me, or, oh no, I would never do it that way. Let's hear about it. Maybe you have something else that you think has worked for you in the past or you'd like to try, and you want to share that with us as well. So we invite you to offer up either one of those as we go through this. So first, we're going to give you a quick example of open-ended questions paired up with pausing and a follow-up question. So again, you'll notice in these tools how much Annalise isn't talking, but she is more asking questions. So let's again start out. I'm going to portray Annalise, and my friend David's going to be Jared. So here's the open-end question, pause, and follow-up. Hey, Jared, it's good to get together today to discuss this upcoming presentation for the quarterly finance meeting. Just tell me a little bit about your progress to date on that.
Well, I've gotten a start, but the presentation's far from being finished.
Jared, what does far from finished mean to you?
I've gotten the numbers from all our finance partners, but I still need to consolidate the data, outline the flow for the presentation, and honestly, I still really even need to create it.
Okay, very good. So that's the end of our little demonstration there. It's probably apparent that, Annalise now has what I would call a lot of food for thought in terms of things that she can pose some questions about and kind of dig into it. For example, she might say, well, let's talk a little bit more about the process that you use, to consolidate the data. Tell me a little bit more about that. Maybe she's going to uncover something that is a time eater and she's got a better way, or they can brainstorm together and come up with something. So again, there's a lot of opportunity. He's offered her some good things to really kind of probe into and get focused on.
Yeah, and I would just add the thought, how many times do you walk away from a conversation and
Uh-huh.
then think later, oh shoot, I missed a little piece of information? Or how many times do you think after talking to your boss, oh, I forgot to mention something else? So we are imperfect creatures. We don't always immediately think of everything that needs to be said. And so those pauses, those follow-up questions can help a person lay everything out. And with the trust issue, they may not say the most important thing first. I mean, I've been in many discussions where the most important thing didn't get said until about 15 or 20 minutes into it, or sometimes longer. So it's important to just, when it's that delicate issue, to have a bit of patience. Now, I know that in the comment section, folks are saying things like, oh gosh, sometimes it's hard to have a scheduled conversation, or
yeah. I was going to bring that up, David.
so true.
That's so true. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it's hard to have the opportunity to have patience when the pace of work is really fast. So we understand the struggle and challenge of carving out those opportunities to pull someone aside. Maybe it is in the moment, maybe it's not in the perfect setting, but you pull them aside into a slightly quieter space and you say, let's talk for a good 10 minutes and I'm going to really listen to you first and foremost. And also, by the way, I love the question, talk to me about what's going on. Broad, open, yeah, that really allows the person to jump in. So
yeah, it certainly does. Yeah. David, one other thought I had about, the impromptu conversations that happen, we don't maybe have a half an hour to sit down, but, it's impromptu. That's where I think very purposeful practice comes in. Mm-hmm. I know I found that to be the case with myself when I first learned these tools. It was the notion of, okay, practice asking an open-ended question, practice writing open-ended questions, and the more I practice, the more it becomes what I call a mental model. And I don't have to think about it quite as much because it becomes kind of an ingrained way of thinking, okay, this is how I'm going to talk to somebody about a problem. David, any other thoughts?
I think that's especially true, Marianne. Sorry about that. I almost talked over you there. When it comes to the summary statements and the reflection statements, we don't necessarily repeat back to people what they just said to us. That's a little different form of communication. Yeah. And yet it is such a powerful tool when people use those summary statements, which we'll demonstrate here in a second. It gives the other person an opportunity to say, did I get it all? Did I say everything I wanted to say? Was there more? Is there a nuance I want to add? And it allows the conversation to go, to be complete, I should say, so that everything is out there. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So David, let's go ahead and move on to summary statements. And if we have time, I'd like to maybe touch base on a couple of the points that were raised by Cynthia and Angie. But here is an example of a summary statement that Annalise might use in the conversation with Jared. Mm-hmm. So Jared, if I heard you correctly, you were successful in getting the numbers you needed from the 5 subunits. And then your next task will be to pull the numbers together in a way to portray our cohesive picture and then build the presentation. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's about it. I usually also spend some time thinking about the flow of the presentation and how to construct it so that the audience gets the full picture.
All right, very, very good. So that's the end of our summary statement. Mm-hmm. You see that, a summary statement isn't intended to be what has often been referred to in the literature as parroting. I'm not using the exact words. And so therefore, David doesn't have to say, well, of course, that's what I said. it's more of an opportunity to say, okay, check, check, check. I think I got it. And David could come back and say, well, you know what? You forgot this. You know, you didn't remember point D or whatever. So it's, I think it's a great tool to, again, not use necessarily one time, but to use periodically through the conversation, especially if it's a long one or a difficult one, to let the other person know that you're listening.
Yeah.
Anything else, David, you want to add?
Well, from the chat, I want to highlight something, and
Okay.
many of us have heard this before, but it's powerful and important. It's good to remember it. And this is from IV, I think. It's listen to understand, not just to respond. You know, that's just it's a truism. It's been around for a long time. How often, though, do we move through our day so quickly that we're
Mm-hmm.
just kind of thinking about getting our business out there and done, get our point across, move on to the next item? In
Mm-hmm.
these conversations where it's tough and the person is going through some difficulties and you're trying to balance, as we say, compassionate accountability, which isn't easy to balance both at the same time, really digging into the listening part. I really want to understand you. I really want to get where you're coming from. I want to see where your stuck point is absolutely critical to help them move out of that stuck point. Because likely, if it was an easy problem, they would have fixed it already.
Yeah,
If it was no big deal, you wouldn't be talking about it, right? And so it's going to take a little bit of you doing some work, and that's going to take some time to do that real listening. So thank you for that comment.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Melissa. Let's
Yeah.
move on. We've got one last tool that we want to cover. I think it's one of the most powerful, and it's a reflective statement. Oftentimes, when we're faced with an emotionally laden situation, as leaders, we may tend to shy away a little bit from it. You know, we may be too angry, we may be resentful or whatever, so we tend to do that. But a reflective statement is really designed for the leader to say, hey, I'm listening not just to what I'm hearing you say, but also what might not be said, those nonverbal cues that I'm picking up. So here's a quick example. Jared, you seem a little hesitant to share more specific details of your progress with me.
Yeah, I guess so. Look, I know I'm behind from where you expected me to be.
Go on.
It's just been so hard these past 3 months. Sabrina's been really sick. I've had to get Tariq up and going in the morning and then get him to preschool and then hustle back to the house and then get to work and then, to make sure, does Sabrina need me or not? It's really been something.
Jared, you seem really overwhelmed right now. Okay, so actually in that little demonstration, we actually used two reflective statements. You seem a little hesitant, hesitation, reluctance, reticence, that's an emotion. And then also feeling a little bit overwhelmed. So those, again, are good tools. And we invite you to maybe dig in a little bit more. And at the end of our webinar today, we'll have some resources for you to take a look at that really help you better understand those tools if these are new concepts for you. So David, let's go ahead and take a look at another tool that we thought might be useful for our listeners today. And this is what we call a Q4 process tool for compassionate accountability. And by the way, this is your parting gift, everyone who's on the call with us. So you'll get sent this, and it's just a good flow chart to really help you, make sure that you are in fact, kind of covering the basis in terms of the tool. I want to just point out a couple of things on it. Don't want to go into huge detail on it, but do want to just cover a couple of things that I think are important. The first black X way up at the top, has employed discussed the issue with you? Honestly, there are very many situations where people don't share that information. They're reluctant to really tell you about what's going on in their personal life because they do fear retribution. They feel as though, something bad might happen to them from a work or career perspective. And so, again, if they don't share, don't assume anything. Just, I think, as David pointed out, his very first tip was just to maintain that frequent check-in, frequent conversation with them. Second black X is one that I encountered as an HR practitioner, a leader who knew about a personal situation. But I asked this question, I said, well, how is the situation impacting the employee's performance? And the leader said, well, it's not. And I'm like, well, okay, if it's not, it would be a step beyond prudence to start to dig into it with that employee, unless he or she has shared it with you. As long as performance meets expectations, things are going the way they are. Again, but always good to check in and look for those signs of stress that could possibly pop up. Third black X, does the employee accept help? Again, there are people who feel like, oh, no, this is my issue. I got to solve it myself. Jared may say, my deal, there's nothing the company can do for me. That may in fact happen, but it is incumbent upon you, as you see highlighted in the gold thing, the gold box there, to really be aware of the resources that your organization has to offer people who might be experiencing mental health issues, physical health issues, financial health issues, whatever it happens to be. Know what your resources are. And also, I guess the other point that I think is absolutely essential on this tool is to make sure that you are honoring confidentiality, yet keeping those people who have a need to know informed of the situation. Again, you may not necessarily have to completely lay out the situation, but you may say something like, Jared is undergoing a personal issue at this time. I'm supporting him. And, if you have any concerns, please contact me and I'll work through them with him. Something like that. You don't have to really reveal everything that's going on with Jared at this point in time, but rather just give a little bit of information to know that, to let the stakeholder know that you're aware of the situation. So again, Marianne, David, we'll be sending this out to people. So we have a few more pieces of advice in what we call our sage advice. So we'll pop that up there. Again, a few thoughts on how to really strike the balance between, and I do want to say it's a delicate balance between compassion and accountability. And I guess for me, we've already talked about confidentiality, but really understanding what your resources are and not trying to resolve the problem all by yourself, because it's pretty difficult. Communication, David emphasized. On the do side, stay in Q4. We're talking about having a regard for people and as well as respecting the expectations that have been set for your organization. So that's important. And I think the other points we've probably already touched upon, except number 2, and that is to just make sure that your manager and your human resource representative are appropriately dialed in, because they've probably been there before on an issue like this and can maybe offer you the insight of what to do. David, anything you wanted to say on sage advice? Any other sage advice, I should ask?
I did notice in the chat that one person commented that an employee is coping with something that's pretty sensitive, a mental health challenge, and then the employee has the right to draw a line as to how far they want to go into that conversation. And Marianne, as you were saying, we are certainly not suggesting today that everyone becomes psychologists or medical doctors or accountants and solve all the problems for their employees, but it is a matter of making sure you have told them about all the resources that may be available, EAP, those kinds of things that your company may have offered to them. But then, and staying close, letting know, hey, if you do want to share whatever you might want to share, I can be here within reason. And, hey, maybe work is the place for you to take your mind off some things sometimes. So let's just keep our focus on getting things done, because that ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what we need what we need to be doing. I'm aware that we just have a few minutes left. We've got a few more not do's that maybe or do's that people could share in the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you've been in a sticky situation where you're torn between compassion and accountability and you've made a wrong move, you know, you survived it. And so what advice would you give to someone who maybe is new to a leadership role about what not to do? So as we close, just go ahead and start sending those to us. And David, let's go on because we are close to the top of the hour and talk a little bit about the resources. And then we can come back to the don't do this type of situation. So anyway, all right. I'd like to talk a little bit about just the two articles that we referenced. There is the specific title and authors if you're looking to do a little bit more reading. Also wanted to make mention of Leadership Through People Skills. It's the foundation for the work that Psychological Associates has done. Dr. Lefton and Dr. Bazada, great authors. First became acquainted with this book more than 20 years ago, went through the first and second copy, and now I'm on my third one because they got a little dog-eared. So I take it with me every time I'm consulting or facilitating. David and I also identified a couple of YouTube videos. So you'll see that's what is in the middle there. If you are thinking, yeah, I'd like to take a look at something. I didn't put the Brene Brown one on here, but you can search that out on YouTube for her as well. So David, do you want to talk a little bit about the Psychological Associates solutions that might be useful as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, everyone who has attended is going to be getting a follow-up email with that tool and a link to our website. I invite you to go take a look at the website and see all the solutions we have. I'll just highlight the first one's called the Q4 Edge. That's our online learning platform where you have the opportunity to really dig into the model, the 5-step format, all those tools that we talked about today and more. Communication tools, and you'll have the opportunity to really practice those skills. So if you want to learn more about what the Q4 Edge training program is all about, go to the website or reach out to me or to anyone on our team. We'd be happy to tell you more. But maybe we could wrap up with a closing thought here, Marianne.
Before we do that, I can't let this one pass up, David, because it's a good one on the don't things that you should not tell that a new leader should not do. And this is a very common phrase. It's part of kind of the culture today. Suck it up, buttercup. You know, and it just, this person said it's not helpful. And for someone who is struggling, and again, you know, you may have a completely different view of what the struggle is. That doesn't really matter. It's just, it's not helpful. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah, anyway, so go ahead with the closing thought, David.
Yeah, so I just want to remind folks about our newsletter, which has all kinds of articles of interest. And I want to say one last thank you again to our sponsor, AccuMaxim, for supporting us today. We really appreciate you and are so glad to have you as a business partner. So that, I think, does it for today, Marianne. I'll just leave this slide up as people are saying goodbye. Thanks for joining us. And if you have other topics that you want us to cover in the future, let us know.
Yeah, we're absolutely interested in what your challenge is, what your pain points are. So please let us know what you'd like to hear more about, and we will certainly get started on that. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
All right, take care, everybody.